Kevork, thanks for coming back. I was actually listening to our conversation. It was only 2 months ago, and we were talking. You had forecasted where you thought all this was going, and I was hoping you were going to be wrong, but it's apparent that you were not wrong about it. And my first question is, how are you managing yourself, knowing what was going to happen, but still, until the reality of it comes to you, right? So you see it where it was going, but now it's here. So how are you doing?
Actually, everything that is happening now in Syria is anticipated. Of course, it doesn't take a genius or a rocket scientist to foresee it. So I wasn't the genius in this case because I studied international relations and diplomacy, and I studied modern history, and I have lived through crises in the region, wars, regime changes. In politics, if you want to analyze a situation, you can analyze it when the event happens. But when there are patterns, and you can see that similar crises led into similar outcomes, then you could predict and say that this is going to happen. And we have seen it in Iraq, we have seen it in Libya, so why the situation in Syria would be different? And in this case, we have more evidence to show that this was going to be the case, that the person who overthrew the Assad government is the founder of the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria. And he has a long track record of terrorism, not only in Syria, but also in Iraq. Therefore, when you give weapons, ammunition, and power and intelligence to a group which doesn't believe in national unity, but rather establishing what they call an Islamic State, then you will have a situation in a country where at least 40% of the people are alienated, because we need to understand that the Kurds, who are Muslims and Sunnis, they reject such governance. The Christians, the Alawites, the Druze, all ethnic and religious minorities are not going to accept to live under Ottoman-style rule. And there is a history behind it. And everyone will start to think narrow, and instead of identifying themselves with the national identity of the country, they will start seeing themselves as part of the subgroups. And this is exactly what is happening nowadays in the country, especially that Jolani has proven that he cannot become a president for all the Syrians or the rule over Syria, but rather over a particular group. And this group is not the Sunnis. People seriously have to take a pause and see the situation from a non-Orientalist point of view. Because nowadays, it's these so-called experts on Syria, they're like, oh, the majority of the Syrians are Sunnis, so they like Jolani. But who said that is the case? Who took the opinion of the 60% of the Arab Sunnis of Syria? Was there any poll? Was there any referendum? Was there elections? No. Now, the Sunnis, of course, they will try to adapt with the new situation and try to live and continue their lives. And that doesn't mean they endorsed him. So we have a small minority of radical ideologues who belong to a Wahhabi ideology. They are takfiris. They belong to the organization of Al-Qaeda, basically, despite their claims that they have abandoned Al-Qaeda. And this group has taken over the country. Now, I lived in Syria for a long time. Half of my life was in Syria. I lived in a Sunni city, Aleppo. I studied in Damascus, which is overwhelmingly Sunni. And the people that I met were rejecting this type of ideology. And they were very moderate, and they believe more or less into Sufism, which is a spiritual Islam. And this means that I believe in God and Prophet Muhammad, and I believe in his teachings, but those teachings are for me and for myself. My relationship with God is private. This is my private business. But the Takfiris and the Wahhabis, they want to impose what they believe on the rest of the people. And the rest of the people, if they reject it, then they give themselves the authority to basically use violence and killing and ethnic cleansing and genocide in order to achieve that goal. This is what Wahhabism and Takfirism is about, and this is the same ideology that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, which they rebranded him now, his name is Ahmad al-Shara, and I reject to use that name because it's part of the PR. It's part of the PR to polish the name of this guy who was in Iraq in 2003, sending car bombs to the Shia neighborhoods in order to start a civil war, then arrested by the US Army. Actually, he was arrested by the Iraqi army, and he was given to the US, and the US sent him to the Buqa camp, and he met with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi there. And in 2011, miraculously, the US released them. It's a coincidence, I know, that in 2011 the war starts in Syria, and then Baghdadi and Jolani leave the Buqa camp, and they join the so-called Syrian rebels. Baghdadi forms ISIS, Jolani forms al-Nusra, the offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they wreak havoc in the country. So now that he reached to power, we have to remind your respected audience of few facts and realities, one of which is, in February 2012, Jake Sullivan, who was an employee for Hillary Clinton back then, his boss was Hillary Clinton, and then he became the national security advisor for Biden. He sent an email to Hillary Clinton saying, quote, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. This was in early 2012. And then we have the Defense Intelligence Agency, DEI, in the US, DIE, sorry, they sent a report to Obama telling him basically that the driving force behind the insurgency in Syria are Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. And then we have Trump during his election campaign in 2016 or 2015. He was saying that Obama and Clinton, they made ISIS possible, or they formed ISIS. Okay, this could be just a political rhetoric. But then we have the former U.S. envoy to Syria. He was under the Democrats and under the Republicans. His name is Jeffrey. He said, Jolani's army is an asset for the US strategy in Idlib. And this is the army which expanded from Idlib and occupied the rest of Syria, which gives me the impression that this was a joint intelligence operation between different regional and international powers in order to create a proxy army by Jolani and his gangs in order to overthrow Assad. Now, once he overthrew Assad, I believe that the US policymakers are smart. Regardless of all the criticisms, I think that they knew that Jolani is the best fit for this position, because Jolani can destroy a state, he cannot build a state. And they needed someone like Jolani in power so that the rest of the country feels alienated. And this paves the way psychologically to draw vertical divisions in the country. And this creates the identity crisis in the country. Now the Alawites feel themselves as Alawites, no longer Syrians, the Druze, the Christians, the Kurds, everybody. So this could be the first step towards the Balkanization of Syria, the partition which is in the grand strategy of Israel. The Israelis are not even hiding it. They have the Union plan for 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, basically. They planned for the partition of the Arabic countries, first destroying the national armies in Iraq and Syria, and then balkanize these countries based on ethnic and religious lines. Therefore, this genocide that is ongoing nowadays in Syria, and I say genocide because there is the intent for committing genocide. When you watch the videos and listen to these terrorists who are committing these acts, they are killing people based on their identity with the intent of eliminating them physically for belonging to an ethnic or religious group. This is the classic definition of a genocide. Now we watch these things in Syria and we see that this only serves the Balkanization of Syria. Now nobody wants to live under Jolani.
So I want to ask you a question because when we spoke last year, you had said that Jolani at some point, when he is no longer of any use, he will be disposed of. So the fact that he's still in power and he's be able to create this division amongst the uh, Alawites, the Druze, the Christians, is that why he's still hanging on there? They're still finding use for him.
Definitely, because remember, Jolani postponed the elections for 4 years. So he appointed himself the president of Syria for 4 years. He abolished the constitution, he abolished the parliament, he abolished the cabinet, and he appointed himself, his brother, and the rest of his friends and colleagues as the leaders of the country. So he is basically the god at the current moment. He is not responsible in front of anyone. He can do and sign on any agreements with any other country or corporation. So we have different things that they're expecting from Jolani, one of which is, of course, to draw these vertical lines in the country, divide the people into ethnic and religious lines. But there are other important things here: investment, earth minerals, fuel, gas, borders. Israel, at the current moment, still advancing inside Syrian territories and declared 60 kilometers deep inside Syria demilitarized zone, whereas Jolani sends his army to kill the Alawites. What does that tell you? That he's okay with the expansion of the Israeli forces in Syria for him to become legitimate in the country. This is all part of the agreement with the US and Israel for Jolani, someone like Jolani, to come to power and give up on the south. Now, the entire south is militarily in the hands of Israel. There is no military post any longer. There is completely demilitarized, and Israel has the dominance with the artillery, with the air force, with everything. Even Damascus is in the hands of Israel, because Israeli occupation forces are on the Mount of Hermon. And the Mount of Hermon is 20 kilometers away from Damascus, and they are the highest hill overseeing Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, etc. Therefore, any American howitzer artillery can shoot and bomb inside of Damascus from Mount Hermon. So technically, Damascus has fallen in the hands of the Israelis. This is goal number one. Goal number two, as I said, the Balkanization and drawing these lines. And there are also very important thing, which is the maritime borders. And this is the first thing that Erdogan spoke with Jolani. This is the first thing that he wanted to do, draw the maritime borders, because he wants to invest in the gas fields in the Mediterranean. And this is the place where Israelis do not want to see this. They don't want for Turkey to have the gas in the Mediterranean. Cyprus doesn't want to see it. Greece doesn't want to see it. Russia doesn't want to see it. Therefore, it seems that there is a cooperation now between the US, Israel, and Russia in order to separate the Syrian coast from the rest of Syria in order to minimize the Turkish influence in the region. And this goes in line with the interests of at least four powers in the region, as I mentioned: Cyprus, Greece, Russia, and Israel. Israel told the Russians that they are able to keep the Turkish influence in Damascus and not south of Damascus, and this is where Netanyahu said the Jolani's forces cannot move to the south of Damascus. This is a demilitarized zone, so they keep them at least 90 kilometers away from the borders. And then in the Mediterranean, Israelis do not have the capacity to have, because they don't have the geographical connectivity with the coast. This is where the Russians are going to play a role in cooperation between the US and Russia. And therefore, the US and Russia are now discussing privately in the UN Security Council for a UN resolution for Syria. So we have to see the content first in order to judge. But the Israeli press and the Russian press leaked some information that this is what they are intending on doing, creating some sort of an Alawite autonomous region in the coast.
This episode is brought to you by Vaulted, launched by McIlvaney Financial Group. The simplest and most affordable way to own physical gold and silver. Physical gold is the only asset outside of the control of the government and banking system. They can print dollars, but they can't print gold. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to vaulted.blbvux.net/coffeeandamike. So you talk about the Balkanization, Russia, Israel, the United States, Turkey. Where does Saudi Arabia play a part in any of this? Qatar?
Qatar is, yes, definitely.
Explain to me how Qatar plays a part in all this, because they are the ones, and correct me here, Kevork, they are the ones that are insinuating the attack on the Alawites.
Yeah. Qatar is a major player. It has spent the most over this regime change operation in Syria. According to the former foreign minister of Qatar, Hamad bin Jassim, who was the prime minister and the foreign minister between 2011 so till 2020 or something, so during the peak of the war, he says that they have spent tens of billions of dollars in Syria. The Qataris invested a lot and ideologically in order to champion the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region, but this has been, of course, in cooperation with Turkey, whose president says they are a Muslim Brotherhood country as well, or they believe in a Muslim Brotherhood ideology. So Qatar has invested a lot in Syria, and nowadays when we watch Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari-owned TV outlet, you would be shocked by their reportage. Like absolutely ridiculous, absolutely bloodthirsty coverage, calling the victims, all these children and women that we've seen getting killed by Jolani's gangs are Assad regime remnants. So they're not only paying the salaries of Jolani's army, they're giving them the political cover, they're giving them legal cover, they're giving them diplomatic cover, they're giving them now media cover to commit these atrocities against the religious and ethnic minorities. I think the reason for it is Qatar has a big interest, of course, in the gas in the Mediterranean and extending their own gas pipelines through Syria. But there is one more factor in this, and that is why all this violence against the Alawites? Like, it's not just the killing; it's the thirds. Like they're hungry of blood. Like you see that the way they're killing, they're enjoying it. They're having pleasure by killing people. The reason for it is subjugation. It's humiliation. It is to send a message that if in the future you think of rising against the deep state that we are building now in Syria, because Jolani is transitional. Qatar and Turkey are building a deep state in Syria that stays friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey and Qatar for a long time. So whether Jolani or no Jolani or whoever comes, all these elections would be irrelevant. There is a deep state like in Egypt. The army is the deep state. And they want for this country to stay on this path, and that is the aligned with Turkey and Qatar. So they're sending a message to the Alawites that in the future, if you think of participating in the political life or coming back to the military, to the army, in order to regain any sort of influence and leverage in the Syrian society and over Syrian politics, or challenge authority, this is going to be your destiny. This is how it's going to end up. There is no other explanation why, for now the 5th day, all these massacres that we can see televised, and there has been no serious attempt to stop it. If any the most junior official in Turkey or in Qatar now picks up the phone and calls Jolani, these massacres stop. But they haven't done it. Why? Because they wanted to teach the lesson to these minorities there. And therefore, when you turn on Al Jazeera and you see Al Jazeera basically portraying all this death as Assad regime remnants, which means they're justifying it and they're legitimizing it. And this is, in my opinion, it's not surprising at all. Al Jazeera has lots of blood on his hands. It's a nest for Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Muslim Brotherhood groups. They've been polishing them for quite a long time. And now they feel like this is their moment. They have occupied Syria. It's a very important country because through Syria, they can influence other countries in the region, including Lebanon, Jordan. Therefore, this should be seen as a serious threat, by the way, by the Qataris and the Turks on Syrians, on Lebanese, and probably also later on Palestine and the Jordanians. But who will stop them? You mentioned Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia should see Turkey's expansion and the Qataris expansion in the region as a threat to itself. But when I see the coverage of the Saudi outlets, it's not different from Al Jazeera, and they're putting all their weight in supporting Jolani.
With that, then, how can this work if they're going to do a Balkanization of Syria, where you have all of these, huge countries trying to divvy it up? How is that even going to be sustainable? I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where Turkey, Israel, Russia, United States, Qatar are going to piece this apart and just live, and life goes on.
It's just a recipe for more violence. Like 110 years ago, when Sykes and Picot divided the Levant, how did this end up for the region? When they also created Israel, how did it end up? Haven't they sliced Palestine? Haven't they sliced Syria from Lebanon? Haven't they sliced the Levantine countries from each other? And this all ended up into fragmentation, ended up in the countries not being able to integrate economically, socially, culturally, and they stayed in the back. And this is something serious. Like, keeping the region in its place is a goal, because independent powers who call for independence. What is the independence? Like, when Syria gained its independence in the 40s, have they really gained their independence? No, they didn't gain their independence. As long as these countries depend on US dollar, depend on foreign material, depend on financial support from outside, depend on other countries' armies to defend them in certain cases, they're not independent. But any movement in the region which at least called for the liberation of the region from foreign dependence, they have been crushed. Therefore, they have, when the nationalists rose against the Brits in Britain in the 1920s, they empowered the Muslim Brotherhood against the nationalists so that there would be an internal foe. So they're playing with the people of the region. I remember Norman Finkelstein once said, the goal is to keep the Arabs in their place, is to put the Arabs in their place and keep them in their place. And it's not like because they're Arabs, but because this region is very vital. It's an intersection between Europe and Asia and Africa. It has lots of trade routes. It has lots of energy resources. Imagine if the people of the region can use all these resources for development instead of destruction. But if you have countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia investing billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars from their revenues to destroy other Arabic countries through this type of terrorist groups, then these countries will stay failed, and all these corporations will have an upper hand over the country, including in Syria. Now they're selling out the country completely. Telecommunication, irons, earth minerals, gas, oil, ports, airports, everything. It's going privatized very, very, very quickly. So foreign corporations will make money out of it, but the people will pay it by the blood. But this is also, these companies should have the interest in stabilizing the country, because they can't operate under instability. So it's truly astonishing that these countries and imperialist countries, basically, and these corporations, they prefer someone like Jolani instead of dealing with someone like Assad, for example. I mean, I'm quite sure that Assad wouldn't have minded to give opportunities to foreign investment, but they didn't want him, because then he could use the revenues of this in empowering his military or giving support to the Palestinians or to the Lebanese. They need someone who is very passive on these cases. Like, the issue of Israel is very detrimental for the West. So they needed someone like Jolani, who's completely passive. He doesn't react to the Israeli attacks. He doesn't support the Palestinians or the Lebanese. And at the same time, he's giving lots of licenses to these corporations to invest in the country. But how can a division and balkanization of Syria be sustainable? This is your question. It can't be. Therefore, this will create more conflicts in the country. It will just move from a war between Jolani's gangs and the Alawites, for example, into different mini states, again having issues against each other, like it happened in former Yugoslavia, right? I mean, until today, if the foreign troops leave this area, I'm sure that Bosnia and Serbia and all these countries, they will be in a war. So you really need the military power to keep this together. But who is going to do that? Nobody has shown an interest in sending troops to Syria in this case. Therefore, we are just moving in a vicious circle of an empty circle, basically, bringing someone like Jolani to power, creating problems for the people, security threats, existential threats, and this creates lots of divisions. People separate from each other, creates divisions, probably mini states, and then someone emerges from this country, a military figure, and says, I will unite the country, and then everybody comes together again, and we just built another security state like Hafez al-Assad built. So it's like we're moving from political authoritarianism into theocracy, and then somebody comes from the military again and establishes another source of authoritarianism. So this is just a recipe for repeating these countries to repeat history over and over again without finding an exit that could give them the position to become independent. Like imagine they talk about federalism in Syria, right? Like, oh, let's have a federal system. And now everybody likes federal system because this is the least worst scenario for Syria. Keep the country together, federalize it. That was something that was a nightmare for me a year ago. Now I see it like this is the least worst thing that could happen for Syria, right? A federal system. But imagine if these people of the region find themselves in the proper position to propose federalism between these different countries in the region. Iraq, Syria, Syria, Lebanon, or Syria, Palestine, etc. And some countries' economies are based on services, others have manufacturing, others have oil. If these powers come together, they can create a very strong independent power in the region and can impose themselves on the international world, on the global scene. But we always talk about divisions and not unity. Anything that is about unity, these unifying powers have been destroyed in the past since the independence of these countries, or technical independence of these countries. So definitely the people, we can blame the people. I blame the people a lot for falling for the same mistakes over and over again. But the money is in the hands of the US, and the projection and the strength of the money and the rest of the world is in the hands of the US, and therefore they are able to shape the outcomes of this type of conflicts.
It sounds to me it's a black hole of cash, blood, and death, just continuing a carousel.
Yeah, that's why I lost hope, to be honest with you. This is the first time I say it on a podcast. I didn't even say it on my channel, but I completely lost hope for the region to rise and become independent and prove itself as a player that can challenge the powers intervening in our affairs, stealing our natural resources, and just become a respectable power on the global scene, you know? It's become so ridiculous that our region will always be dependent on one power over another. Either it's the Soviet Union or it's America or Israel. And now we have, this region is in the worst place, I would assume, since Sykes-Picot. What happened now in the region is worse than Sykes-Picot. And people maybe now who suffering in Syria, they don't, of course, care if it's balkanized or not. There is someone outside his door who is going to kill him. But I have the privilege to take a one step back and zoom out and see what's happening because I'm not threatened with death outside of my door. And I see this is worse than Sykes-Picot. I see it as worse than the Six-Day War, which the Arabs lost. It's worse than Nakba. Basically, the fragmentation of Syria will definitely reflect on Lebanon. Because, I mean, you're Lebanese, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, there is a famous saying, if Syria sneezes, Lebanon catches cold. And I think that this is true. Like, I lived in Lebanon. I see how Lebanon is intertwined and interconnected with Syria. And if Syria is divided, this will reflect definitely on Lebanon. And this will create an internal strife in Lebanon as well. It's not like Lebanon is immune from everything is happening in its surrounding. So after October 7, if you want to put the events, that sequences of events, I don't see what happened in Gaza as a victory for the Palestinians. I don't think that is victory for the Palestinians. Hamas can say and claim that they have emerged victorious because they weren't destroyed, basically as a military power, but the Palestinians lost everything in the Gaza Strip, everything. They paid from their lives, they paid from their infrastructure, they paid from their souls and everything. Like, there is no future for the Palestinians in Gaza. They're unable to reconstruct it. And now there is the Israeli side completely sieging it again and cutting electricity and everything. And this also moved to Lebanon. Hezbollah's leadership completely decapitated. Hezbollah has been localized. The two front lines have been decoupled, the southern Lebanon front with Gaza. And Iran took one step back and took its hands out of Lebanon and Hezbollah. Otherwise, we wouldn't have seen all these assassinations and in Lebanon. I'm not blaming Iran. I'm just saying Iran, as a realist player in the region, they have seen that this escalation is going to end with a clash with the US and Israel, and they didn't want to do that. First of all, whoever carried out October 7, they never spoke with the Iranians. They didn't take their opinion about it. They didn't ask them if they like to open a regional war in the region. And they didn't ask the Hezbollah that they're going to carry out such an attack. And they didn't ask the Syrians. I'm not talking about the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of it, but this attack has led into sequences of events in the region that the supposed allies of Hamas were not discussed. And they didn't give their consent. And despite that, Hezbollah intervened and they paid a huge price. Look, Hezbollah is not defeated in Lebanon, but they're definitely not victorious from this war. And they have to accept it because in 2006, the Israeli side accepted the defeat and they have formed a committee called Vinograd in order to study the reasons why Israel lost the war in 2006 so that they come back later and be in a stronger position. But this is my opinion, of course. When I watch TV outlets or news belonging to Hezbollah or affiliated to Hezbollah or Lebanon, they're talking about victories of Hezbollah. I personally do not see it as a victory. And then you have the regime change in Syria, which is a very important player, or was a very important player in the region, and now it's completely gone. So it's a black hole, basically, now the Middle East. God help all these people stuck there because there's going to be a cycle of violence that's unimaginable. And there is no way out with this type of mentality. Like when I'm watching these videos and the justifications for the killings in Latakia, Tartus, Jabal, etc., I'm shocked and horrified. Like there are people who look like normal like us, and they're posting videos on social media platforms calling for feeding the dead people in Latakia and Tartus to dogs or to the fish in the Mediterranean. I think we have to really put a mirror in front of our faces and face the reality, and that is there is a serious problem with radicalism now in the region. And if we don't address it now, people will pay a huge price very, very soon. And this will lead into destruction. After destruction, we will eliminate our entire countries, which were cradles of civilization in the region, completely erasing the identities and the civilizations that we have preserved for thousands of years in the region. So this is just how I see things. I'm a little bit pessimistic. Maybe I'm watching too much of a violent footage, but I'm still sane, and I think that we are in a really bad situation in the region.
Well, and I've had people on here where they use the term "hope is not a strategy," and
Yeah.
so what you said to me, I look at it like it's just you being objective of where things are. So, what do you advise to the people that are still there? I'm assuming you still have friends and contacts and whatnot. What do you suggest to them at this point?
Leave. I'm being honest. I don't see that there is a way to counter this phenomenon at the current moment. They have the guns, they have the money, they have the ideological backing, and they have regional powers on their back. And this reminds me of the Armenian genocide. This reminds me of an era where even though some people carried arms against the Ottoman Empire and then the Young Turks, they were exterminated. And this type of forces which relies on a takfiri ideology, and they don't see you as an equal human, basically, and they're basically calling these people pigs. And it's like, I'm watching videos of like, you already killed the person, like you executed him. Why do you empty your 30 bullets in this person? It's the pleasure, it's the humiliation that they're trying to do for these people. And I don't see any hope, not even a 1%, for people who are sane, regardless of their ethnic and religious minorities, to live their lives normally in Syria. I'm just talking about Syria now. So if there is anyone listening from Syria and this person is sane and he wants to build a future for himself or herself, Syria is not the place at the current moment. If you're an Armenian, go to Armenia, even if it's temporarily. Watch what's going to happen to Syria first. If you have any opportunity to go to other countries, to the UAE or Egypt or to Europe for studies or for work, don't stop. Like, it's not the place to live. It's not the place to stay sane as well. It will create lots of trauma for the people in the future. And it is already too late to stop it. So it's a free fall. It's not the time for idealism, but rather very brutal realism. Just leave. If you can leave, it's better. And I know many people are contacting me from Syria asking my opinion. I'm just telling them this exactly. Brutal honest with them. I'm not telling them any lies. There are people who live in a la-la land. Like my father, for example, he thinks like, no, things will be all right. It's like, I'm like telling you, you've been telling us for 14 years, things will be all right. But I'm being very honest with you. Like I will, if I took my family out and we settled them outside of Syria, and I told them, if you think of going to Syria back, I will come and stop you physically from doing that. I could give you the same advice, because if I'm giving my family this same advice and forcing them to stay outside, I would also give anyone who is like me or has thinking about future and building a family or a career for himself. It's not the place right now.
So to the point where you even you advise, leave your house, leave your car, just get out of there, quick.
Sell if you can sell it, because there are people, especially in Aleppo and in Damascus, they're buying and selling at the current moment. There is a big business of there is a dollar in the country, because now lots of dollars came from Turkey and from other countries, so people are dealing with dollars. I'm saying, like, if you're an Armenian and you could sell your house in Syria, you could buy a new house in Armenia very quickly. And there's so many, they give you also an Armenian passport in Armenia. I don't find any reason for them to stay. I'm also pushing through my Greek friends, especially journalists and some contacts in Greece, to raise this point also, like the Alawites and the Christians, if they arrive to Greece so they can receive an asylum at least, I think it's important also for the countries like Greece, Cyprus to play an active role because they face the same danger from Ottoman Turkey, from neo-Ottoman Erdogan. And it would be a noble thing to do, and these people will not cause troubles for them like the radicals, because the issue with the refugee crisis was that there were radical elements among the refugees and they have caused problems for the European countries, etc. I'm not talking about all of them. They're definitely percentage. They are radicals. But the Alawites and the Christians will fit perfectly. So I don't want to see them disappointed and facing more misery. Like I'm talking to friends in Latakia in the coastal line. She's telling me like they're escaping deaths by seconds. Like these militants, some Uyghurs, Tajiks, Uzbeks coming to the neighborhoods and basically killing everyone. And they're running in the farms, running for their lives. She's a woman with her old mother and father from farm to farm, escaping death. Like, what is this, Like, it's just a death squad running after them everywhere. And who made this possible? Like, who gave them all these weapons, ammunition, pickup trucks, all these drones? Like, they don't have oil fields. They don't have factories to make money. Who's giving them the money? Which country in the region has the financial resources to pay all this money? Qatar, Saudi Arabia. And CIA spent a lot, but they stopped the money. But then we noticed that the USAID was funneling money to these terrorists through humanitarian organizations. They spent over $9 million paying the salaries of the officers of Jolani's army because there was a corrupted NGO saying that they're a humanitarian organization. They received the money from USAID and he's distributing it to the officers of the Al-Nusra, which is the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria. So they kept them fed and alive and well until this regime change happened. And we come to the beginning of this conversation with you. Like, how did you anticipate it? I'm not a genius, but I just connected the dots and I watched the patterns in the past. What happened when Gaddafi left? They turned it into an open-air slave market. It's 3 entities now in Libya. And it's going to be the same thing in Syria. People will not enjoy one united country, like people traveling between Aleppo to Damascus without any checkpoints. No, it's not going to be that way. It's illusion.
And so if somebody's not going to intervene, like Qatar could call Jolani and say, stop this. But, obviously they're not interested in doing that. At what point will this cycle where the violence and the killing will stop? And if so, if there is a point, are we close to that?
So Russia and the US are meeting privately in the UN Security Council because of this. And I think that they are on the same page on this, on Syria. Russia doesn't mind the Balkanization now, it seems. And the same thing goes for Israel and for the US. The priority is to stop the violence, the killing. And the only 2 countries can impose this formula are the US and Russia. If they both agree on this, the European Union has no, they're supporting Jolani. Basically, they invited him to Brussels now. They invited Jolani after all these massacres to Brussels to attend a conference for donations for Syria.
Change his name, put him in a suit, and he's a totally different person now.
Yeah, and the European Union made a statement about these massacres. I don't know if you saw it. They basically blamed the victims. They said this cycle of violence was caused by the Assad regime remnants. This was the office of Kaya Kallas. The office of Annalena Baerbock made a statement saying she calls for inclusive dialogue. This These people are insane. Marco Rubio condemned the attack. He named the perpetrator. But if you read between the lines, it's quite obvious. He names 4 minorities. He says the US stands on the side of the Alawites, the Christians, the Druze, and the Kurds. And those are the 4 regions we were talking about, the Balkanizing Syria, right? And so they protect these regions. They can protect the Kurds. Israel protects the Druze and the Christians and the Alawites in the coast. It's obvious what they are intending on doing. That's why they condemned these attacks, because this will be used as a pretext and a justification to say Jolani is a terrorist, we cannot be trusted. Israelis do not want him now. They say there is a jihadist there. So what's the Israeli interest? Is the Union plan. Okay, they go along with it. Trump will not resist Israeli demands here. So, and the Russians have an interest in keeping Turkey out of the Mediterranean or eastern coast of the Mediterranean and keeping their own port. So there is a mutual interest between the US, Israel, and Russia in this case. So this is the unfortunate truth, by the way.
So will Turkey be the odd man out? At some point, do you see the guns?
No. Turkey will stay in Aleppo, Idlib, Homs, Hama, Damascus. Yeah.
Will they want more at some point? Will somebody want? There won't be room for everybody. Too many chiefs.
I mean, if Turkey is satisfied with the imposition of these formulas by the US and Russia, they have to accept it. They cannot. Trump's position on Erdogan is quite clear. And Erdogan knew before Trump comes to power that this is going to be the case, that he will impose new compromises in Syria. So he rushed for the regime change and unleashed his HTS forces in order to find new equations. And now the Americans and the Russians are managing these new equations and trying to shift it and change it a little bit in their favor. So Turkey is definitely the most important player in Syria, and it will stay so. But they will not be able to govern on all Syria. They will not be able to impose Jolani to become the leader of all Syrians. This example of Jolani becoming a president, acting like he is some sort of a civilized person and representing the interests of all Syrians is over. Like after these massacres in the coast, even the Kurds who are shaking hands now with Jolani, and they say they will integrate the forces of the Kurds and with the forces of Jolani. But in the regions where the Kurds exist, in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, they're not going to allow these Nusra hordes to come and govern over them. They're going all to be from the Kurdish forces there. So the Kurds are well protected. They have over 60,000 soldiers. They have the backing of the US. Jolani doesn't dare to attack the Kurds. American forces are there. He doesn't dare to do that, and he doesn't dare to attack the Druze because they're protected by Israel now, or Israel claims to protect the Druze, but nobody protects the Christians and the Alawites. So he is doing what he's doing now against the Christians and the Alawites because they have no one on their back. It's so absurd from the press to claim that these Alawites and the Christians have the backing of Hezbollah somehow or Iran. But I don't see any support from Hezbollah or from Iran to Christians and Alawites there. I just see that they are being slaughtered without any consequences. So Jolani chose the Alawites, also the Christians, because they don't have anyone in their back. If it was the Druze, you would see Israel coming in. If it was the Kurds, you would see the US coming in. So he knows it well. And I told you they want to teach the Alawites a lesson because Assad was an Alawite, and there were many, let's say, senior positions in the military were Alawites, so they want to take revenge in their mind.
I know I'm running out of time here with you, but how long will it take, in your view, for this Balkanization to be completed, or do you envision it'll never happen?
I really hope that it would never happen, but this is just from my position of comfort. You know, I'm talking as someone sitting outside of Syria. I don't have a gun over my head. But when I'm asking the people who lost their parents and their family, even here, everybody is talking about like, we don't want to live with these monsters. This is what I'm hearing. We just want our peace and stability ourselves. We don't want them. And I think the Balkanization has already happened here before it happens on the ground. Therefore, I hope it fails. I hope the federal system would be the lesser of two evils in this case, and that would be at least to keep the country together. But if the Balkanization is going to happen, then it will definitely take a year and a half to prepare. And that is going to be very bloody during this time, lots of clashes. So I want to see and truly like follow this case closely, because how I also analyze is I follow many Israeli influencers who are from the cyber army of Israel. It's quite clear. And I try to connect the dots, what they're saying and what type of script basically they are distributing to their influencers, because they all post the same thing with different words. And now they all speak about Israel's moral obligation to protect the minorities in Syria. But Israel played a role in creating these conditions in Syria and supporting this type of jihadists in the country, receiving them and giving them medical support, giving them cash, giving them light weapons. So they have created or participated in creating these conditions in Syria, which is an existential threat against these religious minorities, and then presenting them the solution. So create a problem, present a solution. Create a problem, present a solution. I don't buy into the Israeli claims that they like the minorities in Syria, but when I go to the pages of these Israeli influencers and I see the comments from Syrians asking for help from Israel, it's mind-boggling. And people just have forgotten about everything that happened in Gaza and everything. Now Israel is the moral authority in the region again.
Last question. Is war with Iran inevitable in your view?
No, it's not inevitable. I think there is going to be more economic pressure on Iran, but Iran has shown some flexibility with the US and also shown very clearly that they're not interested in direct confrontation with Israel or with the US. And the steps they took back after an accident of the helicopter in of Raisi, coming of the new president and his team. This was so hilarious to watch, because the Iranians came to Syria a few months before Assad fell, and they were asking Assad to open a front line against Israel from the Golan Heights. And the Syrians were like, why everybody has to participate in this war but except you? Like, why we should be a direct part of a war daily, not like Operation Promise, I hit you, you hit me, and then we stop. No. You want us to open a front line from Syria, but you're not going to intervene? So they rejected it, and then they leaked it to the press to bash Assad after he fell, saying like, we asked him to open a front line. I mean, if Assad made 1,000 mistakes in his career, this wasn't the one. This is not one of them. Why would the Iranians want to use everyone in the region for this war, but not themselves? And they took few steps back, and also in the intelligence support and protection of the Hezbollah leadership. So the recent events in the region has shown that the Iranians are very realist players, and they wouldn't choose confrontation with the US and with Israel and take a 1 step or 2 step back and preserve their national identity, and probably like I don't want to use the term sacrifice, but it's like, if there were some players in the region being harmed, it's okay, but as long as our country is safe and secure, it's fine. And I'm reading lots of reports by my Iranian friends, like they say as if we have a soft coup in Tehran after the killing of or the death of Raisi. Therefore, I don't think that the Iranians would be suicidal enough to open a front line or a war with Israel now, especially when they lost Syria, and Syria's entire air defense system has been destroyed, which means now Israel can fly all the way to the borders of Iraq and fire on Iran. They are more exposed now than they used to be a few months ago. So Iran is not in a really good position. Probably the Yemenis will come in support of them, but how much damage can the Yemenis cause for Israelis in this case? It's very far from Israel with limited capabilities. The missiles that they're shooting, it hits the targets, but it's not a game changer. The equations are not changing. The Israelis still have a nuclear weapon. They have all these aircraft carriers in the region for the Americans. The nuclear tactical bombs of the U.S. in the Mediterranean and in Qatar. So the U.S. is definitely the dominant power now over the region. And I say it as someone who worked with words and deeds for a long time so that we would be liberated from the American dominance. We didn't want to become enemies with the US, but we wanted to be free from that, independent. But as my professor Jamal Wakim said, who is a brilliant Lebanese professor, by the way, of geopolitics, the region needs another 50 years now to recover from the mess that has been created, geopolitical mess that has been created in the region and the setbacks that the independent powers have received.
Where can people find you, Kevork?
I'm posting regularly on my X account the updates from Syria, the atrocities, on my personal account, Kevork Almassian. And I'm also posting video commentaries on my YouTube channel, interviews, etc., Syriana analysis. It's on YouTube and on Rumble.
As always, thank you for doing this. I look forward to our next conversation and continuing to follow your updates.
Thank you very much.
Mic drop.